All right, thanks for staying with us again. This conversation does affect everybody, and that is why we're looking at it again, the finance bill, especially the part that talks about taxes. Most of the bill actually talks about, taxes, the company income tax, personal income tax, value-added tax, stamp duty, and so many other issues there. It comes under what we all call finance bill, but I think that the real name for it is the Tax and Fiscal Law Amendment Bill. Yeah, that's it. The Tax and Fiscal Law Amendment Bill before the National Assembly. Well, to help us get some perspective to what the issues are this morning is Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, who is, how do we call him now? A tax professional. He joins us this morning. He is senior partner, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Some practitioners, especially in the private sector, say it's a mixed grill of the good, the bad, and I don't know what else to call it. How does it come across to you?
Yeah, I think the starting point is to try and look at the context within which this bill is being introduced. So for many years, the tax system has been very static, not being able to catch up with development in the business environment and the economy generally. There are many countries around the world where they amend their tax laws every single year because these things are very dynamic. During the military, we used to have what we call the Finance Miscellaneous Provisions Decree. Of course, the military would not consult with anyone. They just sign stuff, but they were making changes
but then
almost
the military,
every year.
Because they are not tax professionals or finance professionals themselves, they must have recruited professionals.
Yeah, most likely. Because some of the provisions they actually had during the time were things we're still using today. And it's not like they were, meaningless. A lot of them were very sensible, including even reduction in, tax rates. But that ended in 1999. Since we started our democracy, it's been a little bit more difficult. Former President Obasanjo sent some tax bills into the National Assembly, and only a couple of them were considered, not even in full. So what has now happened is Mr. President has said, you know what, why don't we send one bill that seeks to amend many of our tax laws? So this finance bill is seeking to amend 7 different tax laws. It has 56 different sections, and it's proposing over 80 amendments to the laws, various laws. So this is significant. So on one hand, this is a good development. Now, to your question about whether the good, the bad, or maybe you have some provisions that you describe as being ugly, I think it depends on who you are and your perspective.
The perspective that the LCCI, I'm sure you are aware of what the LCCI is saying, what NECA is saying. Well, they cited some good, angles to it, but then they have concerns about some other segments.
Yeah, which is valid. And the point is that I haven't seen anyone anywhere in the world who says, I'm so excited to pay my taxes, I can't wait, to pay it.
Even you?
Even me, yes. No, that's a fact. That's a fact. I do not know of anyone who is so happy to pay their taxes. It may be less painful, but not that you're so excited. And the reason is because taxation is one payment you make that does not give you direct benefit. So when you're hungry and you go to a restaurant and you spend 1,000 naira, you get the food that is worth 1,000 naira. When you pay a tax and your tax is 1,000,000 naira, and your neighbor pays only 1,000, even without evading, maybe you're richer than your neighbor, it doesn't mean that the benefits you get from government will be commensurate. So people tend to want to reduce or avoid it. So what has happened is government has taken the time to look at different aspects of the economy, ease of doing business, SME, infrastructure, capital markets. And they have done a good job of trying to cover all of those spaces. But we also have to pay attention to one of the objectives, is to raise revenue. Now, if government wants to raise revenue, it means that some people have to pay more taxes. So you would understand when they come out to say, we do not like that, which is okay. But the point would be just saying no is not sufficient. You have to be constructive to say, no, but this is what we are proposing. given that government has to do something differently.
You know, raising revenue is a big deal, especially, and I think it was instructive when the president presented the bill just with the appropriation bill, such that, you know what, they are vital. This is vital to this and vice versa. I understand that you perhaps were part of the people that drafted this bill, am I correct?
That's correct.
And, you know, beyond the bill being passed, I understand there was a public hearing in the House of Representatives, and it's going to be late today, and I mean, people are expecting that the president will sign it eventually. But beyond that process is what will happen right after that bill is in place. So let's, if you could just help us, walk us through some of the low-hanging fruit, such that once this is in place, this is what you expect to happen for the economy, for revenue generation, because people have said perhaps the challenge is not with revenue generation, it's about using that revenue efficiently. So if you could just walk us through some of these low-hanging fruits, what Nigerians should expect when this bill comes into practice.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's a very good one, actually. So the work of the committee had been, ongoing for a long period of time. In fact, originally the committee drafted the national tax policy for Nigeria, because that's the starting point. You need to say, what direction do you want to follow? And then once you set those things clearly, you then enact the laws to make them happen, and you hand over the law to the administrators to implement. That's the way the tax system should work. So we started with the national tax policy, and now the reconstituted committee is the one now drafting changes to the tax laws. So the process, I was both at the hearing at the Senate and also the one at the at the House of Reps. And in fact, yesterday, PwC, we organized a session with organized private sectors, sector players and executives, and we had the Honorable Minister for Finance, Budget and National Planning in attendance, where we looked at some of these issues. We did a survey, which was actually very interesting, and we asked people about what are they most excited about in terms of the changes, and we're very specific. And people were excited about what we call excess dividend tax. Again, going to your point around low-hanging fruit, this provision in the law currently, as you speak, makes a company pay taxes more than once, and I'm talking about CIT at 30%, especially if you have a holding company. Because when you give out your dividend, the taxman will say, well, you have no taxable profit. Why are you giving out dividend? But a holding company cannot spend money. You need to pass it on to your shareholders. The impact of this had been that a lot of conglomerates and multinationals, including indigenous Nigerian companies, are not able to put their holding company structure within Nigeria. And that means Nigeria is losing out on investment. Particularly now that we've signed the African Continental Free Trade Area, people are looking for where to put their headquarter operation within Africa, and Nigeria has to be attractive. So it was interesting that that was something that everybody is happy about. And of course, one of the changes that people were not happy about, we also asked them, was VAT increased to 7.5%, which is not surprising. But out of what they were happy about the exemption for small businesses. So if you run your small business, both in terms of VAT and company income tax, you can roll out the drums from January 1st, 2020. Low-hanging fruit.
We'll get to that
yes.
MSME part, because I'm actually quite excited about that. But one of the issues that people have raised about the VAT or any tax at that is the number of people. I think it was even PwC also that came up with a report of how, or was it NESG, how very few people are within the tax net. Wouldn't that be more attractive to get a lot more people into the tax net as opposed to increasing tax for those who already pay?
Yeah, so that's correct. So I don't want us to look at the finance bill as a bill that's increasing taxes.
But that's the way it comes to going across.
Unfortunately, maybe government would have done a better job of giving out a balanced narrative. So unfortunately, the initial conversation was just about the 7.5% VAT. So the tax rate for small businesses is down to 0% CIT. For medium-sized company, that's between 25 million and 100 million, is down from 30 to 20%. We have this stamp duty on POS, for example, that everybody has been complaining about. You drive into a fuel station, they say, okay, we're adding 15 naira, or you have to find another way of paying. They've now raised that threshold to 10,000 naira. Raising it to 10,000 naira means you take out the vast majority of our poor people. They don't do transactions, single transaction at 10,000 naira. You have a lot of other exemptions and waivers that have been introduced. But we also need to try and understand that government, why they are giving away some taxes, which is okay for SMEs and the vulnerable people, they have to find a way to ask the middle class
To perhaps
and the
cover
upper.
for...
Absolutely, which is why on the exemption of VAT items, the things that are exempt from VAT, they've expanded the list. So, and a lot of it is basic food item, roots, vegetables, bread, milk. But then when you now make it 7.5 and you exclude the poorest people from paying it, it means that your target is middle class and upper class, and that is fine for me, it's appropriate. But we still have to hold government to account, to your point about the NESD, and incidentally, I'm also the research director for the Fiscal Policy Roundtable of the NESD. So I'm involved with this research. Essentially, Nigerians are not paying taxes officially to government. In fact, more Nigerians are paying informal taxes to non-state actors than they are paying to government. And there's so many taxes such that when Nigerians say we pay so many taxes and a lot of taxes, and government say, but we collect so little, it does not mean that they're lying. It means that in between when people pay and when government gets the money, there's a lot of leakages and corruption. So a lot of these monies that people are paying are going to individuals and not to government.
I don't know if there is any way that this finance bill covers that or tries to deal with how we monitor that conduit so that we're blocking the leakages.
Unfortunately, this bill has not been able to address that yet. So it's in the national tax policy. But one thing, and we also learned from the experience of the UK, is in trying to introduce a finance bill, you don't want to put all the issues bordering the tax system in one finance bill. Because the idea is this will be an annual exercise. Because if it's too much at the same time, it's going to be too complicated and you not get buy-in from stakeholders. So ultimately, we want to get to a point where it will be in our laws that government has to be transparent with how they report the taxes they have collected, and more importantly, how those tax revenues are being utilized. Because there's that trust deficit, Nigerians are not willing to pay taxes. In fact, from that study of the NESD, about 83% of Nigerians think that evasion is either not wrong at all or it is wrong but understandable.
How many percent?
83% of Nigerians.
Like 8 out of 10 people.
Absolutely. Think that evasion, this is not avoidance. Evasion, they think it is fine. When we ask businesses, nearly 70% of businesses also think that evasion is okay or it's not okay, but we understand and therefore it's not bad.
So it makes sense, pardon me, that people say, widen that net such that if those 7 people, or those 8 people, 7 businesses, 8 people out of 10 people actually pay their taxes, imagine how much revenue the government will have.
That's correct. We asked them why that is the case, and number one was they do not trust government. And in fact, they trust tax officers even less. So when you don't trust government, you don't want to... I start by saying that it's not easy to pay tax anywhere in the world. It's painful. When you now don't trust the person you are giving the money to, you don't want to pay because you think they're going to waste the money, they're going to steal it, there's corruption, wrong priority. Even when they're not stealing the money, they're spending it on wrong priority. We have states where they're building a golf course and they don't have primary schools, they don't have tables and chairs. We have those building airports. And the people who are flying the governor and their friends and a few other guys, vast majority of their people are poor.
So I don't know, I want to believe that because this concern has been raised with you through the OPS and a number of other people, it must have been something that you have considered. What's the process then to bridging that trust deficit? You talked about how government is communicating these policies to people. So what element in that communication is making efforts to bridge this trust deficit?
Yeah, I think it has to be a joined-up approach. On one hand, there has to be institutional frameworks to make sure that we have transparency and we ensure that the level of waste is reduced significantly, if not totally eliminated. We hear every time, and we laugh about it and move on. We should be more angry in Nigeria. You hear about government civil servants going to London or Dubai to go and do a training where everybody that's attending, including the facilitators, are Nigerians, are living in Nigeria. So that's not corruption, right? But you're wasting the money. because you could have done that in Lagos or Abuja or somewhere else. So we have to make sure that within our laws, starting with the Constitution, we have clear provisions with consequences for people who are entrusted with resources belonging to all of us to use them judiciously and be accountable to the public. The second leg of that equation, which I think is even more important, is that that push has to come from the people, the organized private sector, the middle class. I would not expect our poorest people who are ignorant to be the one pushing. Those of us who are in the middle class and the organized private sector have to push and demand accountability. And then that way we start making progress. Clearly, deciding not to pay your taxes because you're not happy with government does not solve your problem. Essentially, what's happening in Nigeria is every single person, every single one of us is paying a very high tax rate in different form. There's a small component you pay to government, but it's a big component you pay to yourself because you're now the government providing electricity, water, and road that government could have been providing for you. And we do know that it's more expensive to construct 1 million boreholes for 1 million households than it is to get 1 million households to pay taxes to government to provide potable water.
Pennywise, pound foolish.
Absolutely.
Now, you have a number of very interesting implications for various sectors. Malpe wants to ask you a question, but before we go to her, let me just ask you about the sixth in the report that you did, which is about implications for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. On the one hand, you have listed a few things. I'd like you to expatiate a little more on that. And secondly, is how do we communicate this to these people in the medium, micro, medium, and and small sectors, such that because you said 41.5 million businesses are in this bracket, and I'm sure these are the registered ones. There could be a lot more.
Yeah.
So how do we communicate to them that this finance bill is good for them?
Yeah. So this is one area where I personally have been trying to get government to understand the importance of this kind of communications. And that was why we had this session even yesterday. So even the organized private sector, the level of communication and engagement could have been better. Now, by the time you go below that level, you can almost say the level of engagement is almost zero. And the way to communicate it, if you go on the street now, you enter a bus or a cab or Okada, and you say finance bill, they don't know what you're talking about. But if you say, hey, they said they want to increase VAT, maybe you say it in pidgin, they will probably be aware of that. They are aware that there's POS 15 naira charge, stamp duty. So that communication has to start by engaging platforms and associations. So one thing Nigerians do, I think, better than any other country is we are social animals. So you have associations for everything. Pepper sellers have associations. Connect with them. You don't speak the Queen's English that we're talking about here. Yeah? Speak their dialect. Speak pidgin English. Go to the market. Let them know the objective of what you're trying to do. What's in it for them to get their buying in and understanding. That communication has to happen. It has to happen on radio. It has to happen on TV. It has to happen on print. Everywhere. You need to connect with the people. You owe it to them to let them know what you're doing.
So that public hearing is definitely not enough.
That one is for rich people.
All right, let's go to Abuja. Malpe has a question for you. Malpe.
Oh, yes, I do. And this one, I think, will be more around the let's say middle class now, but a demographic of the demographic that affects young people. And I think they're the ones who will be hugely affected by the impact on the digital economy. Can you tell us what implications it has? Because we understand it also has implications for the digital economy.
Yes, indeed. One of the questions we asked during our survey, we asked business leaders about, now, nobody wants to pay more taxes, but if government has to introduce, measures to increase taxes, which one would you support? Incidentally, majority of them, in fact, the number one item they supported on the list is taxation of the digital economy. It would affect everyone, maybe affect younger people a little bit more because they're very active on social media. They try to promote their businesses by doing adverts on social media and so on and so forth. So on one hand, we have to acknowledge that this is a big area and it's still evolving and it's very complicated. We have the action plan planned by the OECD and the United Nations. So this is a global action plan, because sometimes when you then introduce a measure around the digital economy, it becomes an issue of diplomatic row with another country. So the US will say, well, this is an attack on us because they have some of the biggest tech companies around the world. Like we've seen in the case of France wanting to introduce some of those taxes, and the US was pushing back. But what Nigeria is saying now is that if you keep earning income from Nigeria, using digital means, but you're not physically here, we are going to define what they call significant economic presence. And that's going to be defined by the minister. So there's no definition yet. So we have to wait and see how that plays out. But once that has been defined and you cross that threshold, you then have to be liable to tax in Nigeria, both in terms of income tax, and of course, for your services and your goods, there has to be VAT that will be charged on that. So I think this is one thing that clearly Nigeria has to do. Whether the current draft we have will solve the problem, I have my doubts. But I would say it's a good starting point. Let's start and see how it plays out, and then we can learn from it and tweak this maybe in another 1 year or even less.
So are you saying then that it's going to affect more the big, perhaps multinationals? I mean, we saw that row with France and the US, especially with the taxes on Google and Facebook. But what do you say to, the young person who perhaps he or she is just promoting his or her business on social media? Do you think that they have any tax implications that they're going to bear?
Potentially everybody will have to pay taxes that they were not paying before on digital transactions. So for some of it, if you go online today and you order something without promoting any business in Nigeria online from a store in Nigeria, the VAT is already being charged because the supplier of that product is a Nigerian company, and the tax authorities can simply go to them and say, you haven't charged VAT. So usually where we have the challenge is when you import services from outside Nigeria, or you make use of platforms provided by, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Facebook, and then you run an advert, and government is saying, but you did not pay us anything. So what government is planning to do now is to direct banks and payment platforms like card providers to be the one charging the taxes and deducting it. So in that case, everybody will be affected, including young people that are doing businesses online.
On a final note, if we could just look at the effect on the energy sector, because when we ask people to pay increased VAT, they say, well, we don't have electricity, for example, so we're paying for our electricity, and then you're asking us to pay for VAT. So I understand that this will affect the energy sector, especially oil and gas, to be precise. So will that perhaps mean increased, probably paying more to purchase petrol and what have you? Will that be the effect?
Not directly. So some of the changes in the energy sector for oil and gas is simply asking them to pay more taxes. And I know this has been difficult for them because there was first the production sharing contract amendment that increased their royalty rate. And now this one is introducing withholding tax on their dividend, which they didn't used to pay before. But also indirectly, in a way, both electricity as well as when you buy fuel at the pump are supposed to be liable to VAT. But because those prices are regulated, when government says you can't sell for more than 145, even if you add VAT, I can only still pay 145. So until we get to a point where government decides, you know what, we are deregulating the price of the tariff for electricity and the price of fuel product, particularly petrol, then we'll see an increase in the amount we have to pay for those utilities.
So for now, it's safe?
For now, we're safe.
There are many implications that are listed, from the report that you have done in your organization, implications for the banking sector and capital markets, implications for the insurance industry. We've talked about the energy sector. It'll be nice to know how the implications for the consumer and the industrial product industry, will affect a number of people. Can you give us just 30 seconds on that?
Yeah, I think for the consumer products, the one of the most significant is excise duties. So we have some products, and the list is much longer than those that are currently liable to excise duty. They're mostly tobacco, spirit, and alcohol, but the list is much longer. So just that the excise duties have been suspended. So when those products are produced locally, you pay excise duties. But when they are imported, you don't pay excise duties. Now, because we've signed the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, it means that once we implement it, someone who produces in Ghana will not even pay import duties. They just send it straight to Nigeria. then the Nigerian producer becomes less competitive because he's charging excise duty. The person producing the same thing in Ghana is not paying import duty and not charging excise.
So how does
this
that
law,
how does that help local
yes,
production?
absolutely. So this law, this amendment is saying that we have to impose the same excise duty that we impose on locally produced items on the imported items. So that means that the local producer remain competitive. So that is a good one.
Even though AFTA says you should treat those products the same way you treat your own products.
Yes, that's the way we're treating our own products. We shouldn't treat it better.
All right, well, this is quite interesting. I know that many people are really wondering what are you guys talking about here, but it's the seemingly uninteresting conversations that actually affect our lives, so it'll be good for us to pay attention to them. Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, Senior Partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, and he's been taking us through this whole new tax regime, deductible from the finance bill. Thank you very much for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're back in a moment to take us further. Please stay with us.